3, 2, 1. Okay, it says we are live, so we're live. Hello, everybody, and hello, Mike Rinder.
Hello, Aaron Smith-Levin, or Aaron Smith-Levin.
Exactly, as I'm known on the streets.
Exactly.
You have been all over the place in the past month. It's been just over a month that the book has been out, A Billion Years.
Yep.
How's it been going?
It's pretty phenomenal, actually. The reaction and response has been sort of overwhelming. It's, so many kind comments and, things that people have sent that are encouraging. And, the only problem that was generated was Scientology managed to get CBS scared, and that's why Monique Yingling was on their CBS morning show, and that should have aired the day after the book was released, which then had an impact on the New York Times bestseller list because the book sales were primarily on Amazon, and that was supposed to be the kickoff to get people to go to bookstores, because even though the book sold more books than a bunch of others that were listed on the New York Times bestseller list, they didn't count it because it wasn't bookstore sales. So that kind of screwed that up. But apart from that, it's been pretty friendly, and a lot of interviews have been really interesting. Like, some of the people that I have talked to have been asked different things and had a different perspective. And Patrick Bet David was one that was really interesting to me, just because he's a sort of a, devil's advocate kind of a guy. And I liked that. I enjoyed that interview. And some of the others have been very, very fun to do. I guess this one will probably be fun.
As Danny Masterson's attorney said, there's only one thing that brings people from both sides of the aisle together, and that is everyone agrees Scientology is an evil criminal organization. So you've been on Megyn Kelly's show. You were on David Packman's show. I guess Patrick Bet David's not really political. Have you done any other invited to come on to any other political programs?
Tomi Lahren asked me to come on her Tomi Lahren, or whatever her
Tomi
name is.
Lahren.
She's got some weird new podcast thing, but it just didn't seem like a good fit. It's like on this sports network. It was kind of weird. I didn't totally understand it. I sort of went, we'll wait and see. I don't know that there's been any others. I think that generally everybody has a political leaning one way or the other, and I've kind of gone, look, I don't care if you're a conservative or a liberal, you still have people that listen to your show, and they are an audience to potentially read the book. So I'm not here to talk to you about your politics. I'm here to talk to you about my book and about Scientology. So I don't really care. I mean, if some really wild, out there kind of person asked me, I probably would decline. But generally, I just go with the flow.
I'll tell you what, though. So Tomi Lahren, obviously, she's very political. She comes with a lot of baggage. She is very high profile. If you go on her program, what would be amazing to hear? I would call her far right, someone from the far Christian right.
Right.
To push her a little bit on, Tomi, you realize it's the Christians that do most of the protection of Scientology in the courts and the thises and the that's. And I'm not sure the Christians even understand that they end up carrying a lot of Scientology's water. I don't know.
You're right, Aaron. Maybe that is worth doing. Maybe I'll revisit that one. Maybe you might have just talked me into it. I don't have an issue with her politics. It was like, she's on, I don't even know what this is. It's some network that's like a sports net, started by a guy who was fired by ESPN or something, and he created this new thing, and she's like an outlier. It's all about college football, and suddenly there's a Tomi Lahren show in there. But then again, I did the Barstool, and that was amazing. Arian Foster was like really a cool guy. I just didn't expect that at all. So Yeah, maybe I will revisit that one.
The Barstool interview might have been one of the only interviews that you've done on this tour that I haven't watched. But except for a few minutes, were they unusually educated on Scientology?
Yes.
They were, right?
Not unusually, because nowadays a lot of people are. Like, when a lot of people who have done shows with me about the book have taken the time to at least read some of the book. Many of them have read the whole thing. And so they are far more educated than I have been used to. Like in previous times, interviews on the media have generally been just, tell us about Tom and Nicole, and what about Katie and Suri, and that's sort of the extent of it. A lot of these ones have been very much more into the more significant things about the world of Scientology or my life, or that sort of stuff. So
yeah, well, without getting too deep in the subject, because politics pisses people off no matter how good your intentions are in discussing it. So my whole time on staff and in the Sea Org, I don't remember hearing a single political conversation. I don't remember anyone giving a damn about anything political, whether it was local, state, federal, world. No one cares. L. Ron Hubbard said the reactive mind is the cause of all bad things, and only Scientology auditing can fix it. There's no point trying to fix the world through politics or da 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 da.
Right.
And yet these days, Scientologists have become so much more vocal and political, and they tend to be very far right leaning. What do you? I mean, what did you have any? Your time in Scientology, was politics a thing?
No,
No,
it was not.
What do you think's going on here?
Well, I think that politics has become more of a thing in this country, in the last 10 years, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. It's become a much more flashpoint kind of issue. Scientology has always, because of the writings and teachings of L. Ron Hubbard, always been much more of the conservative bent than the liberal bent. There is no question about that. I mean, Hubbard rails against government, big government, little government, every sort of government, rails against taxes, rails against welfare. Like, all of those things are ingrained in Scientology scripture. And so, it's not surprising that the majority of Scientologists tend to be right-wing leaning politically. And, no big surprise to me.
That's true. I mean, I guess when I say no politics in my time, I can always remember the people talking about it outside of the org. Just never, like Scientology itself doesn't particularly care about politics, even though I guess Scientologists on an individual level probably always have to some degree. So, and remarkable, because it's probably the only right-leaning, quote-unquote, organization that has regular shuttles to take its clergy members to the clinic, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, it's
Exactly.
insane. It's completely insane. So just some current event stuff. Have you been following the Danny Masterson trial, and what do you think about how that's been going?
Yes, I have. I watch Tony Ortega's daily videos that he puts up. And Jeffrey Augustine. That's where I kind of get most of the information. Interesting today, there was a fairly lengthy interview with me on Slate, which was really all about the Masterson trial. That's what she wanted to know about, although she mentions the book. So I believe that is unfolding about how I expected it was going to unfold. The testimony of those victims is devastating and very consistent. And I talked in that Slate article about how Scientology is inextricably involved in that prosecution, not because of particularly the beliefs of the people involved, though the three victims and the perpetrator are all Scientologists. It's the fact of how that influenced the actions of the players in this drama and how inevitable it was that it would impact that. One thing that was really interesting was Scientology has now taken the position, because I was commenting on the Masterson case and Slate asked me about it, and they reached out to Scientology to ask them for their response. And of course their response is, oh, he's just a liar, he's just making this all up. Nobody forbids anybody from going to law enforcement, nobody this, nobody that, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end it says, and if anything untoward did happen, then it was Mike Rinder who was responsible for it, because he was in charge of the Office of Special Affairs. And I responded to Slate and said, well, I find this really interesting. I didn't have any information about what had happened at the time when I was, 2001, 2002, 2003. I was doing all sorts of different things. This never came on my radar. But I find it interesting that Scientology is acknowledging the fact that this would be a matter dealt with exclusively by the Office of Special Affairs. And I absolutely can confirm that the pattern and practice of the Office of Special Affairs with anything like this was not to go to law enforcement. Absolutely, right. Without doubt. That just is no way. We're not going to have the PR flap. We're not going to, we're keeping this bundled up as tight as it can possibly be. Right. So, they always shoot themselves in the foot with these kooky responses that they do.
So if we look at what was happening at that time with Danny and these Scientologist victims, so there's Office of Special Affairs staff specifically for, let's just say, Los Angeles. Then there's middle management, then there's middle management, then there's international management, then there's senior international management. At what level do you think at what OSA level, how far up do you think information about the Danny attacks would have flown up the command channels, up the org board?
Well, I think it would have gone to West US, the continental area, and people have to understand how reporting gets done in Scientology too, and particularly in OSA. First of all, it's very compartmentalized laterally and vertically. So, and the vertical compartmentalization is also heavily influenced by you never want to send bad news up to anybody. And you always want to portray everything as being completely under control, no matter how fucked it is. It could be really, really, really out of control, but you're trying to present it as if you've got everything totally, it's under control, sir. So I am sure that it probably, these reports probably got into the weekly report from the DSA at Celebrity Center, who then forwarded them to the Office of Special Affairs, Western United States in Los Angeles. Probably buried in the weekly report from the Office of Special Affairs, Western United States, was a mention, maybe a one-liner. There is an issue with a celebrity and claims being made about, euphemistically phrased, and that may have been gone to someone at OSA International. But that person may not have even read the entirety of the report. You know what it's like. There's thousands of these stupid reports that come in. Scientology reports on everything. Not everything gets read. Who knows if the person at OSA International even actually read or understood what it was that was being said, and never, who knows how it was presented. It could have been something that sounded, and probably was, something that sounded completely innocuous, totally under control. Nobody needs to worry about this. And for the most part, that's true. This, nothing did come of it. There was no flap, no media coverage, no police report, nothing came until at some point there was an effort to shut up one of the women that Rick Moxon was involved in. At that point, it had reached OSA International, because Rick Moxon worked for OSA International in the office of OSA International. But dealing with those sort of things was someone's job, probably in the legal department of OSA International, to send Rick Moxon out and say, make sure that this goes away. So, who knows?
Well, it's true. And also, by the way, so Rick Moxon's name is Kendrick Moxon. I have always called him in my videos Ken. Is he actually known as Rick?
Yes.
Oh, shit. I'm here talking about Ken Moxon this, Ken Moxon that.
No, he calls himself Rick Moxon.
Shit, I didn't know that. All right, Rick.
Or Kendrick.
I got your number now, Rick. And also, a Scientologist committing a crime against another Scientologist doesn't actually set off alarm bells in Scientology, because that's not a legal risk. Scientologists don't go to the authorities. Doing something to a non-Scientologist might start setting off alarm bells in a way that doing something to a Scientologist would not.
That's exactly correct, Aaron. And also something where, if you remember on the Aftermath, we did an episode with Marie Bilheimer about what happened when her husband at the time committed suicide in the Hollywood Inn. And because of the nature of, you've got a dead body there, the police have to be called. You can't just take a dead body out of a building and hide it somewhere. So the police has to be called. But the action of the Office of Special Affairs when that happens is to contain everybody, grab everybody that was a witness, everybody that knew anything, round them all up, pass them out. If the police want to talk to someone, make sure that they've been properly briefed beforehand, that they don't say anything wrong, blah, 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 blah. So when it doesn't get outside of the bubble, there's not much kerfluffle. The waves don't ripple very far. They tend to be handled internally, and this was more an issue for the case supervisor, the chaplain, the ethics officer at Celebrity Center to contain and control, because they don't want their people becoming a problem outside of their organization.
Right. One question in relation to the trial has come up, and I didn't really know the answer to this question, so you're the perfect one to ask. So Shaun Fabos is a Scientologist. He's the son of of Steve Fabos, and Steve's wife is only his stepmom. Anyway, Shaun, as a Scientologist in good standing, was a witness, a very early witness to the attacks, the aftermath of the attacks, and was called as a witness.
Right.
In your experience, would Scientology, would Miscavige order the staff to order the lawyers to personally intervene in this Shaun Fabos issue and coach him on his testimony, or tell him what not to say, or tell him what not to say? Or is that too risky to get involved? Would they maybe be working behind the scenes with the defense attorneys? Would Miscavige have somehow coached, or had Shaun coached on what to say or not to say, or what to lie about? Because Shaun has changed his testimony in this case to try and hurt the victims. At the last minute, he changed his testimony. And the question is, to what degree should we expect Scientology to have been behind that?
I think that's a very high likelihood that Scientology was behind that. I'm not sure that Miscavige was directly behind it. I'm not sure that he is going to do or say anything directly with respect to this case at this point. It's too nuclear. It is too dangerous. And he is probably like, I don't want to know. I don't, hear, see, speak, nothing. But that doesn't mean that, someone on behalf of Scientology isn't going, we need to deal with this. This could be a problem, and there is something that we can do about it. And, I wouldn't imagine that there was probably an approach to him directly. I would imagine there was an approach to his father. That's how I would do it. I would go to the father and say, look, you gotta, like, your son is about to sink a Scientologist in good standing, and you need to get him under control, and here's how this could be dealt with. And they probably figured out this is the strategy to use. Impart this strategy to him.
So, there have been internal Scientology reports about Danny doing behaving very badly with women as far back as 1995. And my question to you is, do you think David Miscavige really gives a damn about protecting Danny Masterson? I mean, what?
No,
Not
I
really,
don't,
right?
I don't think he gives a shit about Danny Masterson, but he does care about whether Scientology is going to be made to look bad. That's what motivates everything that happens in the world of Scientology. Is this going to be good for Scientology or bad for Scientology? If it was good for Scientology, and eventually it probably will be good for Scientology to throw Danny Masterson under the bus, he's gone. Like he will be, they will drive the bus over him, reverse it and drive it back over him, and reverse it and drive it back over him, if that's beneficial to Scientology, or they perceive that it's beneficial to Scientology. Up until now, they are hoping that somehow he is going to escape, and they'll come out and say, see, this was all a bigoted hatred campaign against the new religion, blah, 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 trying to smear us, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Yeah. Last speculative thing about the Danny Masterson case, and then we'll move on to other stuff. I've made a lot of speculation in videos I've done on my channel about the level of the church's obstruction of justice, the level of the prosecution's interest in pursuing Scientology for obstruction of justice. Would you say, does the outcome of this trial have a lot to do with whether prosecutors might be interested in pursuing obstruction of justice matters relating to Scientology? Like, if he's found guilty, does that now make the obstruction much more actionable?
I would imagine so. There is never going to be grand enthusiasm on behalf of any prosecutor anywhere to seek to prosecute what is a, legally recognized religion, because that is a much tougher proposition than pursuing individual actors.
Right.
And that there is possibility that if there is evidence of individual people who were involved in obstructing justice, that they may or could do something about that. But my gut feeling would be, I think it's highly unlikely.
Interesting. Part of me wondered if obstruction is like one of these things like perjury, where yes, it's illegal, but nobody gets prosecuted for it. I mean,
that's true. No, obstruction is a little more dramatic than perjury. You're right. People get away with perjury all the time and even get convicted of it, and nothing really happens. But obstruction of justice is a nastier thing and carries greater penalties typically. But still, they are trying. Every prosecutor weighs the cost-benefit ratio analysis of how much time, how many resources, how much money are we going to have to spend versus what's the potential outcome versus should we be spending our money or time on something else that is going to get us more, public accolades for having, taken drug dealers off the street or prosecuted opioid stuff, as opposed to, members of a fringe cult that, obstructed justice. I just think that the likelihood of it, I mean, look how long it took for them to decide to even go forward with the prosecution of Danny Masterson. I mean, it was a long, drawn out process of, back and forth. Are we going to do it? Are we not going to do it? Is there an upside? Is there a downside? Will we win? Blah, blah, blah. So,
yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And, speaking of long, drawn out prosecutions, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about some of Danny Masterson's victims who are involved in the civil case now being represented by the very attorneys who represented the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, you want to talk about attorneys that are prepared for a long, drawn out battle. It's those attorneys, I think. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they're wonderful. Brittany, Henderson, and Brad Edwards are amazing lawyers. And I know them both personally. In fact, I was with Brittany at the Child USA annual gala 3 days ago because she is on the board of Child USA too. And those guys are the real deal. They don't mess around. And the problem, of course, with all of this Scientology litigation now is this crazy arbitration stuff, which, hopefully eventually there will be a realization in the judicial system that there is something really wrong with this. That this is, as the dissenting opinion in the 11th Circuit judge said, this is not arbitration, this is just arbitrary. And that is what this whole process is. And, while the victims of Masterson had a pretty significant win in the California Supreme Court, saying that they were not being forced into arbitration, but the limitation was because the acts were after they left Scientology.
Right.
And that then means that people who have been abused by Scientology while in Scientology still have to go to arbitration. And that's crazy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But those arbitration agreements only apply to civil matters, right? So if the government, if the state attorneys, if the government wanted to prosecute Scientology, those agreements wouldn't get in the way. If you had to look into your crystal ball 10 years into the future, do you think we see Scientology prosecuted for various crimes?
Yes, I do. And it's funny that you say that, Aaron. I don't know if you watched the series about the whatever the name of that thing was, LuLaRoe, the MLM.
I have not.
Okay, that's really interesting. And actually, we talked to Roberta Blevins, who was one of the big whistleblowers, on the Aftermath podcast. And in fact, I'm going to go on her podcast in a week or two. Those people were all prevented from bringing a lawsuit because of arbitration clause. They had very similar stuff to Scientology. And interestingly, what happened was, there's a lot of people that have brought up, oh, I don't get it. How is this Letitia James bringing a civil case against Donald Trump? Letitia James is the Attorney General of the state of New York.
Yeah.
And she's prosecuting Donald Trump civilly. And people go, wait a minute, she's the Attorney General. She should be bringing criminal charges. Well, no. An Attorney General has all the laws available to them, and some things are civil and some things are criminal. In that documentary, it is really interesting, and I learned something that I had not learned previously, which was the Attorney General's office of the state of Washington filed a lawsuit against this MLM because they were not precluded by the requirement to be arbitrated. They then took the depositions of these people, which is where a huge amount of the information that's used in the documentary came from. And when I was sitting there, I was watching it, I was going, where did they get this from? they're precluded from filing lawsuits, but there's all these deposition testimony. Where's this come from? And I looked it up, and then I spoke to Roberta, and she said, oh yeah, the Attorney General of the state of Washington brought these civil cases. And they did, or a civil case, and they were not required or bound by any arbitration or NDA thing. So they just sued away for, you know, labor law violations, whatever other things that were going on, fraud and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that eventually that may be what cracks this, because a civil case is a much easier proposition than a criminal case. Like, preponderance of the evidence is a standard in a civil case. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard in a criminal case, which is a much higher standard to meet. So we'll see. You know,
very interesting.
Always hopeful, Aaron. As you know, I'm always running around with new ideas of trying to get someone to do something.
Yeah. Wow. Suing the government, suing Scientology civilly is definitely something that you don't hear that idea thrown around very often. That would be very interesting. So speaking of court cases, you testified recently in the Paul Haggis civil case.
I did.
What is it about that case that people don't know and should know?
Well, I think that the biggest thing that people don't know is the fact that the initial thing that occurred in that case was in 2017. And interestingly, 2017 is a very important time, because 2017 is when Alyssa Milano made the Me Too movement become a thing. And 2017 is when Scientology started going after me with the Me Too movement. Me Too, you know, hashtag fire Mike Rinder, hashtag wife beater, whatever all that shit is. In 2017, this alleged victim of this supposed rape by Paul Haggis came forward demanding $9 million for her silence. And Paul Haggis took that to the district attorney's office in Manhattan and said, this woman's trying to blackmail me. And they said, well, the letter is from a lawyer, so that's not blackmail. Lawyers are allowed to do that. Your remedy is civil. You can file a civil case. And he did. He filed a civil case against her for intentional infliction of emotional distress and other things. And she then countersued and alleged that she had been raped by him.
Wow.
Now, his suit got dismissed because it was a lawyer's letter. Her suit, which was actually a countersuit, is what is in front of the jury in New York now. Unfortunately, because his complaint was dismissed, he and his lawyers are not allowed to mention to the jury that she started with a shakedown and that he went to the district attorney's office. Wow. It's like, so they are sitting there without that information. And, you know, we'll see if that, you know, I don't know what's gonna happen, but the coincidences of and circumstances of this convince me that he is innocent. I mean, he doesn't deny the fact that he had consensual sex with her, or that he is a serial flirt, or that he gets himself into trouble with these sort of things. But he absolutely denies that he raped the woman, and I very much believe him. If he had, the last place he would have gone was to file a complaint with the district attorney's office.
That's a very good point. Wow. And in the reporting that I've seen about Paul's lawsuit being thrown out, it did not characterize it that way at all. It made it seem like that it's not that he was. Anyway, the headlines made it seem like the judge was literally invalidating the idea. I'm not being articulated. It did not make it clear what the grounds were for the dismissal, or even what it was specifically that was being dismissed. So
Right.
that's incredible. Tony Ortega reported that Leah Remini is expected to testify tomorrow. That's incredible. Is
Yep.
it pretty much? Would you expect it to be the similar grounds that you testified on, which is the
Yes.
Scientology policy aspect of it?
I would, and she's known Paul for longer than me and has had more connection to him for longer at Celebrity Center, etc., etc. So I imagine that she will testify more about his character and that sort of stuff too, because I didn't know Paul when I was in Scientology. Like, I knew of him, but I never met him personally and didn't have any interaction with him. So there was nothing for me to say about that. But Leah probably has more to say about that. We'll see what happens with her testimony tomorrow.
Interesting. So, Mike, I asked you whether there's anything, because you've been doing so many interviews about this, whether there's anything that you particularly would find an interesting subject to talk about that doesn't get discussed. And you mentioned about the e-meter, that you've come to learn a lot more about the e-meter and how it's used in auditing to make people believe really fantastic stuff. What do you want to discuss on this?
Well, okay. I think that, and I say it in the book, but I've sort of expanded upon this concept a bit now. I think that the e-meter was one of Hubbard's most evil strokes of genius. That it was the thing that makes so much possible to get people to swallow in Scientology. And if you know a little bit about the history, the e-meter came about and first started being used in the era of the History of Man. That crazy book. And he was supposedly using the e-meter to locate these incidents on the 76 trillion years of your cold, hard, factual account of your last 76 trillion years, or whatever it says in the first line of that book. Nibs, his son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., said, oh yeah, well, a whole bunch of that was, drug trips. But I don't know even if that's true. But what I do know is that it started this idea that there is a mechanical device in Scientology, and the beauty of a mechanical device is everybody trusts them. It's not like a matter of have faith in the holy water. This is a device and it has a little needle on it, and it literally does measure electrical current and resistance to electrical current. That's never been in dispute, that the meter itself measures resistance in an electrical circuit. It does. It does that very effectively, very accurately, very perfectly. What is in dispute is, what does it mean? What does that resistance mean? And Hubbard came up with this idea and has sold it to all Scientologists, that the meter not only measures your emotion and thoughts and that sort of stuff, but it measures it below your conscious level. And so if the meter is reading on something and an auditor tells you the meter is reading, you as a Scientologist are convinced that you need to find that which you have yet been unable to unearth on your own. With the help of the meter and the auditor, you will now be able to uncover truths that have been hidden from you forever, 75 million years or however long, whatever. And the idea that Hubbard says, and every Scientologist believes, the meter does not lie. And this, if there is an article of faith in Scientology, it is that the meter does not lie.
Yeah.
And if there is any doubt that anybody has about anything, the meter erases doubt. And then I came to this, because people are always asking me, okay, so when you read OT3, what did you think? Well, I thought it was kind of weird, but, you're told, and this is a standard patter, that you don't need to believe this. What does the meter say? You don't need to believe this. What does the meter say? Sit down on the meter and see if this reads. And, who knows what it's reading on? It could be reading on the fact that it's just so absurd that you're laughing inside and jiggling the... Who knows? I don't know what the reads mean. This is the other thing about Scientology is it says you don't know any... On one hand, Hubbard says, with the e-meter, you don't know anything other than it's reading. That's all you know. You just know that one thing. And then on the other hand, it says, but if it's a dirty needle, it means you've got withholds. If it's a theta bop, it means you're trying to exteriorize from your body. If it's a floating needle, it means blah. If it's a fall, it means this. And everything is then categorized in this is exactly what this means. So Scientologists get convinced that with the help of the e-meter, that, they were all, implanted in volcanoes blown up by hydrogen bombs 75 million years ago after being frozen in glycol and flown to planet Earth on DC-8 rocket ships, blah, 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 and shown 36 days of pictures with God and the devil and angels and trains and ballerinas and monkeys and everything else. And every Scientologist that is a good Scientologist that is beyond OT3 believes that because the meter confirmed it. They also believe that they have a recall of past lives. And something that I realized, Aaron, that was another absolute stroke of genius, which started with History of Man, was Hubbard portraying himself as he has perfect whole track recall. Like he, beyond any other person ever in the history of the universe, this universe or any other universe, has the ability to recall all of his past lives for 76 trillion years or 4 quadrillion or whatever the number is that you want to pluck out of the sky. And therefore, he has unlimited knowledge. It explains how he knows about everything. Mm-hmm. And it explains when Hubbard says this is a part of whole track research, Scientologists go, oh. And then they pay $5,000 to run around a pole because that's whole track research. Hubbard's whole track research said thetans went and circulated around stars, so you're going to run around a pole. And in order to run around a pole, pay me $5,000. And the only command will be keep running. And when you're done, when you're finished, you may want to come back and do it again and pay us another $5,000 so you can be a triple completion of the the course resurgence program like, Rafferty Pendery is. Like, right. And they buy it. And it's because Hubbard says, this is whole track research. And, I know how to run a planet using a computer because, Chug, he developed this system. And so we're going to develop a system. And then you get Aaron, when they started implementing those Chug advices at the INT base, there were these dot matrix printers. And they spewed out these alerts that, they were escalating alerts. This was how this whole system was set up by Commander Chug or whatever his name was back in, planet Gugaborg in, 70, 100,000 million years ago. And these printers, literally, you remember those old dot matrix printers?
And I only remember them because orgs continued to use them for so long after they were obsolete.
They would pile up these stacks and stacks and stacks, like feet high. You know, they'd fold like that.
Yeah.
Feet high of these alerts that then someone would tear them all apart and go hand them out. I used to get stacks of them like this high on my desk every day. I couldn't even read them, let alone do anything with them.
Well, and Mike, for the people watching, these are just alerts that some order you've been issued is overdue.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
right?
And because they escalated, every junior that you had, if they didn't do it after 5 nudges or whatever it was, it escalated to their senior. So if you were high up on the org board, you would be getting these alerts for like 30 people below you every day, and they've each got like 30 orders. It was like just complete. But this was based on whole track research. So it was implemented, and it was like, yeah, right. This is crazy.
Right. Well, so Mike, you've got LRH talking all the time in his lectures and even casually about all of his whole track recall. Like you said, the only one who has crystal clear recall of the last 76 trillion years. Then you have Scientologists in auditing sessions essentially trying to emulate LRH by going as far back into their whole track as possible. And then the e-meter is there just so that they don't feel like complete fanatics. Meaning like they could sit there. The e-meter is in an auditing session what is giving this person some sort of scientific cloud cover or whatever the word would be, that you're not just a kook. This is science. This is a scientific machine.
Yes. The e-meter is an incredibly important breakthrough for Scientology that makes Scientology incredibly difficult to extricate yourself from.
Yeah. And what's interesting, you're talking about something that the e-meter, that's how the e-meter applies in just normal auditing that Scientologists are supposed to consider therapeutic. You have the other more insidious use of it where I could sit you down and be like, regarding David Miscavige, do you have any evil intentions? And you'd be like, no, of course not. Stop it. And I'd be like, well, what did you think of when I asked you? The meter read. What did you think of when I asked you the question? Oh, I thought of the bird flying by. Well, what else did you think of there? Take a good look, Mike. Mike, yeah. I'm gonna help you with the meter. Take a look.
Yeah.
Do you have any evil intentions toward David Miscavige? What is that? What did you just think of right there? What is that? What is that? Right there, Mike. Right there. There. Yeah. I mean, that's how I think in popular culture now, people see the e-meter as a lie detector used in an interrogation device, and that is how it is used.
Yes.
Not all auditing his interrogation, but when you want to use it that way,
it's also incredibly effective. You know, I was talking to Paul Haggis, and he was talking. He said, you know, if I had done anything that I even considered may be unacceptable to other people, whether I thought it was acceptable or not. Like, if I looked down a girl's blouse, like, that was something I felt obliged to disclose in a sec check. Like, Scientologists really believe that, A, the meter is going to find it anyway. So while they may resist, eventually they sort of give in. And B, they believe the idea that Hubbard pushes, that the road to spiritual freedom is paved with footsteps of truth or honesty or whatever. Like, this is a very, very effective way of extracting confessions from people. But it's effective to a point, and then it becomes extracting false confessions from people. Because what happens is you sit there and you sit there and you sit there, and in the end you just start saying stuff so that you can get out, so that you can be done. And that becomes, it's not problematic as long as you stay in Scientology.
Right.
It becomes problematic after you've left, because then they start saying, see, he admitted that he's just a chronic liar. He admitted that he wanted to kill David Miscavige. He admitted that he wanted to do this. He admitted that he wanted to do that. And it's like all this stuff, and it's, whatever. Didn't make any difference back then.
Mark Headley tells this hilarious story of a guy being stuck in one of these interrogations at the international base, and he starts confessing to having burned down the film studio or whatever. And it's like, you can look out the window and see that it's there.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, so the E-meter, and I'm in the middle of watching the first season of The Vow on HBO about NXIVM, and I'm on like episode 5 or whatever. I haven't gotten to the point where they introduce any machines, but I have had people mention to me that there's some machine that is that a NXIVM thing or no?
I don't remember any machine there.
Okay, I didn't think so.
That was in the path.
Or it was in the path, and it's also there's this Apple TV show. I'm going to forget the name of it, but like where their mind is, and there's some machine that they get interrogated with that people keep messaging me like this has got to be based on Scientology.
That's exactly when Patty Arquette she uses that machine. It's really interesting, Patricia Arquette. Anyway.
Oh, in the show.
Yes, in the show. Yeah, like she's like the ethics officer in the show.
Yes,
and she uses it. No, but NXIVM, the more you watch, and even into season 2, the more you will see how much Keith Raniere took from Hubbard, and he told Mark Vicente absolutely that he had studied Hubbard, like he had, and they've got suppression and disconnection and moving up the levels and technology and it's and not being a victim. Like,
it's incredible. It really is. It's so obvious to a former Scientologist how much that guy has taken from Scientology. But I have to somehow eventually I want to find out, what did he study? When did he study it? Where did he study it? Because it couldn't just have been from reading the basic books. There's a lot of stuff you don't get from the basic books. You can only get from bulletins and policy letters.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
You personally spent a lot of time with L. Ron Hubbard, working with L. Ron Hubbard, working with a lot of other people who worked with L. Ron Hubbard. And did he ever talk about Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons? Because people are infatuated with Hubbard and the occult and Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons. And he does talk about it in a lot of his lectures, sort of as like he thinks it's just a very exciting part of his life that he talks about.
Right.
But was it ever something that came up?
Not with me. I never heard him say anything about that. I heard him talk about all sorts of shit, but not that.
I mean, you must have people send you questions through your blog and stuff like this. There is this infatuation with Hubbard and Crowley, and that all of Scientology sprung out of these occult sex magic rituals and whatnot. Just as someone who was so deeply embedded in the early days of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard, how do you respond to questions about that subject?
I usually say that I don't know, but it's certainly there is. Hubbard stole stuff from everywhere. Like he took things from philosophers back to the beginning of time, and from current people, Will Durant, and everywhere was sort of, every experience he had was sort of fodder to come up with something that he could use to make himself sound very smart and educated and whatever. And I think his involvement with Crowley and Jack Parsons and those guys was driven primarily by his desire to have a relationship with Sarah, and not much else. And that he went along with all the other stuff and maybe studied some Crowley and, talked about the sex occult and black magic, but it was all, that's what he ended up doing, running away with her. He didn't end up going into a heavy world of the occult and becoming the leader of the 666 beast monster people or anything. He ran off with her and stole the fucking guy's yacht and all his money.
It's true. It's one of those things, like, if you were the founder of Facebook, you would be the founder of Facebook. It's like, it's for the movie, if you know what I mean. If he was going to go do all that, he would have done all that. The moment he could get the girl and the money and the boat, he ran away.
Exactly. So I don't really subscribe to that. It's sort of,
Interesting. So, I did watch your full interview with Patrick Bet David, which was a 2-hour interview, which is remarkable. You flew to Texas for that. That was in person. That was like in studio, right?
He's in Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, he's in Fort Lauderdale.
They moved.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
they moved to Fort Lauderdale. They have a big thing there. And
wow. So you said
it
something
took
in
me
that.
longer to get home from Fort Lauderdale than it did to get home from Texas. But it's hopeless getting across Florida. It's pathetic.
You said one thing to him that anyway, it means a hell of a lot more to me and probably Scientology fence sitters than it would to him. You mentioned, David Miscavige is known as chairman of the board RTC, and yet you said he's not even on the board of RTC because being officially on the board of one of these corporations would potentially open him up to being involved in a lawsuit. Help people understand. Being served in a lawsuit.
Through the lawyers, because every corporate entity has to be registered with an agent for process of service.
This is part of why they cannot serve him, is because they can't serve him through RTC's offices?
Right. You can serve the corporation, you can serve the corporate offices, you can serve, but anyway, yes, that's why.
So in literal and legal terms, Miscavige's control of Scientology comes not from any role he has in any Scientology-related corporation. It comes from his control of Scientology's C organization. I mean,
yes, although I think he may be a trustee of RTC. I'm not totally certain of that. I know that at one point Mike Sutter and Greg Wilhare and some other people and Marion Powell, I think, were trustees of RTC. I'm not sure if he was a trustee or not, or a trustee of CST. There's all this mumbo jumbo that circulates around these things, and I sort of forget some of it and what, who's what. But his power is derived from his ability to convince people that he's the boss.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Right. It's true.
You don't need, in Scientology, you don't need any corporate position to have power. You don't even really, though you have to be in, nobody who wasn't in the Sea Org could ever be in control of Scientology. There's no question about that. That would never happen. But you don't even really have to be a senior Sea Org person to be in control of Scientology. You just have to convince everybody that Hubbard would want you in control of Scientology.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. Knowing Miscavige the way that you do, if somehow the government, the attorneys, whatever the right way to describe it is, figured out how to get Miscavige in their crosshairs, figured out how to serve him, figured out how to indict him, do you think he would, stick it out and face up to the charges and, go for a win? Or do you think he would flee the country?
Yeah, I think he'd be on the free wins in a red hot minute.
Yeah. I have always wondered with they're opening up these Sea Org bases, places that don't need Sea Org bases. I've always wondered why they haven't just plunked one in a non-extradition country. Why not put one in Brazil? He should.
That may come.
Right.
Who knows? I remember when the IRS CID had him in their sights, and he was literally terrified of being convicted and going to prison. It was a real issue and a nightmare for him. And that's not to say that it wouldn't be if I was in similar circumstances. But if I also had the resources to, it's not just the resources. If they had the precedent that was set by L. Ron Hubbard of how to deal with these things, then that is probably what I would do, and justify it to the world of Scientology by saying, look, Ron When things were going astray, he went to sea in the Apollo. He took off. He went to sea. When he thought that the FBI was going, or the IRS was going to get him, he drove off in his Bluebird motorhome and bought a ranch with cash in San Luis Obispo and hid out in a bus. I mean,
right.
this sort of persecution complex, the victim of a massive conspiracy to destroy Scientology, works pretty well in the world of Scientology because it's been established very well by Hubbard over a long period of time. So if things got too hot for Miscavige, him disappearing out of the country, I think is a highly, highly probable outcome.
Yeah. Okay, last question, and then we'll wrap it up because we've been going for an hour now, and
we have.
Well, yeah. How about that? Time flies. With the release of your book, and even prior with the TV show Scientology and the Aftermath, no one has been slandered and libeled and lied about online more than you. And the question, and everyone on the show got sites, but you and Leah particularly are Scientology's favorite targets. People ask all the time, why everyone should just go sue Scientology for all this slander. Help people understand why that doesn't happen.
I don't believe that the legal arena is the arena in which to engage Scientology. The legal arena tends to be dominated and controlled by those who have the most money and therefore the most lawyers, and therefore they can drag litigation out. They can get the best legal minds to come up with the best bullshit arguments and persuade courts that those bullshit arguments are actually valid, i.e. arbitration agreements in those enrollment forms. It is also, I've never believed that being a plaintiff is a good thing. Plaintiffs tend to get treated by courts with much less leeway than the defendant. So a defendant tends to be somewhat sympathetic in the eyes of the court. Plaintiffs have a much harder time of things. So I have always believed that the public relations arena and the legislative and criminal judicial arena are the places where Scientology is least able to be effective and respond with respect to the abuses that they mete out. They would love to have me file a lawsuit, like a defamation lawsuit or a slander lawsuit, either one or both, libel, slander, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with business practice, there's tons of potential claims that I could make, but they would love to have the ability to continue to ask for, in deposition, every person that I have spoken to, who has paid me any money anytime, anybody that I have in a contractual agreement with, anybody who from the media who has reached out, who from the Aftermath, who we helping in the Aftermath Foundation. And all of those things, if you're a plaintiff, are really hard to say, I'm not turning that over. Like, that information is outside the scope of what this case is. I disagree, blah, 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 blah. The potential of that being ordered by a court to be turned over is pretty high. And I'm really not willing to risk that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A lot of people, even a lot of the lawyers have told me, you have a great case. Maybe that will change. Maybe at one point I might decide, okay, I'm just going to do this just because I think it sucks that they continue to get away with this shit forever. I would rather, frankly, do like a documentary series about these smears. That would be more fun to me, and I think more effective. So we'll see.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, everyone, if you have not yet purchased A Billion Years, you can get it hardcover. You can get it audiobook through Audible. Mike does his own narration of the book. That's how I listen to it. It's absolutely fantastic. And thank you, Mike. This has been a lot of fun. Anything else?
Nope, that's all for now, folks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful night, and I will see you tomorrow. Good night.